In this lesson, we'll talk about creating UVs for our models in ZBrush. Now UVs, normally UVs will come when you want to take a model out of ZBrush and bring it into another application. You'd need to use these to actually create a texture map or normal map or displacement map to apply then in that other application. Think about Maya or 3ds Max or whatever application it is that you're using. So typically if you're building something that's never going to leave ZBrush, you don't necessarily have to have UVs. Sometimes they can help if you have special textures that you'd like to apply in a specific way. Sometimes UVs can help in that way, but you're doing poly painting, so the texture or the color that you see is not UV based until you want it to be. So in this case, let's say that for this little creature, we want to now create a texture map based on a UV layout. Now, there are different ways to create UVs for this guy. We want to go down to the lowest subdivision level. So we'll go down to level 1 here. And then we can come down to this UV map subpalette. And right now we don't have any UVs because it's not telling us that we can delete them. So there's no UVs currently on this mesh. So what we can do is decide what size of a basically texture that we want to have. So if we want to have a 2K texture, we can create a UV map size of 2K. All right, and then we can go in here and create our UVs. Okay, there's also an adjustment kind of section down here. We'll concentrate on create. Now here there are a lot of basically just different letters. So we've got UV planar, so think about that as kind of a plane. It's just kind of a flat projection. We can also tile it, or we can create a packed UV tile. All of these are going to create something, or most of these are going to create something that is maybe not ideal if you've got something that is like a character or organic. For simple shapes, a lot of these can work. These tiled ones, the texture will look fine and it'll apply fine, but when you look at it or if you try to edit it, it's not going to look maybe how you would expect. So for instance, if I just do a packed UV tile on this, we can test this by going into our texture map, and we can go to create new from UV map, and you can see that all of these are sort of laid out in separate ways, so they're not really connected. There's a lot of disconnected UVs. So to actually get our texture saved out with that particular UV map, what we can do is go here to geometry, go up to the highest level. We want to get all the poly paint data in there, and then under texture map we just want to say new from poly paint. So that's going to create a new texture. The look of our character hasn't changed, so the texture looks right, but take a look at this texture. It's basically all over the place. So one polygon is not connected to another, is not connected to another, and it's all kind of crazy. Okay, it works fine, but if we need to edit that, or if we need to paint on it, it's going to be a real pain. So you could change your UV layout. We can go back up to UV map, and let's say we'll do group UV tiles. And we want to make sure, again, that we're down at the lowest level. And so this time we'll do group UV tiles. And again, we will go back up to the highest level once we've got our UV layout done. And let's create a texture from polypaint here. So now this looks a lot better. Now we actually have larger sections which make a little bit more sense, and you can start to make out different parts of the model, although they're still all separated. Okay, so using those UVs can get the job done. You do have other options here. If you have something that's cylindrical or spherical, you can create those using this. Another thing that you can do is to use UV master to create your UVs. So if I go ahead and delete the UVs, we'll go to Z plugin, and again I'm going to go down to the lowest level. And usually it's recommended that you do UV work on a clone. And so what I can do is say work on clone. That'll give me a clone to create the UVs for. And now there's options here for symmetry. We can turn that off. If you have polygroups, you can create a UV island for each polygroup that you have in the model, so you can separate things that way. Okay, and so let's go ahead and just unwrap it. So that's going to go through the process of unwrapping our model. Now it's showing the texture, and that's just because we have that texture on right here. So it's showing that previously created texture, but we can just turn that off. Okay, to find out what your UVs look like, we can say new from UV layout, and it'll tell you, okay, this is what they look like. Now in this case, we've got a seam running right down the center of our mesh here. And so what we can do is go into our UV master. We can enable control painting, and we don't have a ton of control over this, but we can try to kind of choose different areas what we want to protect or attract seams to. Okay, clear that out. So coming in here, I can sort of try to protect this area along the mouth here. Maybe we want the seam to be more along the back, so we can come in and say, okay, I want to attract the seam back here, but I want to protect the front of that. You can, there's also an erase in there that you can use. I want to kind of protect that. And you can't really tell it exactly where to put the seam. Let's go back in here, and let me kind of paint that blue all the way up. So it's kind of a trial and error. Let's see what that looks like. So we'll go ahead and do another unwrap. So that looks a little bit better. You can see that we don't have the seam on the front anymore. And that texture is all kind of one island, so we don't have that, kind of tiled look. Now if you want to actually manipulate the spacing of this or the position in that 0 to 1 space, you can actually go in and come down here to the bottom, and we'll go ahead and flatten this. And you can see it's actually flattened down onto the surface. So I could come in here with move, and I could move it. I can rotate the shell and move it around on that, in that 0 to 1 space, and it's basically like I'm just moving that UV around. And I can, if I want to make it a little bit bigger, I can do that. So I can do some rudimentary editing here. And when we're done, we'll go ahead and unflatten that. And then we want to copy the UVs. So we'll go down to the bottom, copy UVs, come back to our tool, and we've got that low res still. So now we will go ahead and paste the UVs in. Again, it's using that texture, so we'll turn that off. Let's go to our highest level, and let's now create a texture based on our new UVs using the PolyPaint data. So we'll go ahead and say new from PolyPaint. And now we get a texture that makes a lot more sense. Now that's not an ideal UV layout by any means, but at least it's one piece. And you can see that if I had to go in and make some adjustments to that, it makes a lot more sense as a user than a UV layout that's all broken apart like that. Now if you're not going to make any changes and you just need to apply it really quickly, then those UV layouts can work. But I just wanted to show you kind of the different ways that you can create UVs. And now from this point you could export your maps, create those maps and export them out so that you can then reapply them to the UVs to your model here. Now you can also take your model out and do a more extensive UV layout in another application. You know, using GoZ, you can take it out to different applications, which we'll talk about in a couple of lessons, and then bring that UV layout back in. Then you have a lot more control over it. But there are ways of creating nice UV layouts here in ZBrush as well. So that's a look at UV layouts and the purpose of those and how we can create those, a couple different ways. And so in the next lesson, let's take a look at actually creating different kinds of maps. So we kind of looked at creating a texture map from PolyPaint, but let's also take a look now at creating things like normal maps and displacement maps. So we'll take a look at that next.